All right, today we're jumping right into a pretty specific topic, child discipline, as laid out in one particular guide based on its interpretation of biblical texts. Our goal here isn't to endorse or critique, but simply to walk through the framework it presents piece by piece. Let's get started. So the source material we're looking at today kicks things off with this pretty provocative quote. It really sets the stage, right? The central theme is all about control, authority, and discipline in the home. So let's dive in and see exactly what kind of system is built on that idea. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the foundation of discipline, then what triggers it. After that, we'll get into the rules of obedience, and finally, the specific method the guide lays out. Okay. First up, the foundation. Before we even get to the how-to, the guide makes it really clear that we need to understand the why, the core motive and the pattern that's supposed to be behind everything. And it really boils down to two main things. The guide says the entire system is built on this idea. The parent's pattern should be God the Father, and the one and only motive has to be love. To back this up, the source points to verses like this one from Proverbs. The idea here is that God's correction is the model for parents. And this is a key point in the text, that correction is supposed to come from a place of love, even delight, and absolutely not from anger or frustration. All right, so if the foundation is love, what actually triggers the need for discipline? That brings us to our second part. Now that the why is set, the guide gets super specific about the when. And a huge piece of this is the word betimes. It comes from a verse in Proverbs, and the source document really emphasizes that this isn't just a suggestion, it's a critical instruction on timing. So what does betimes actually mean? Well, according to this text, it has a two-part meaning. First, it means you have to start young, like toddler age, as soon as a child starts pushing back. And second, it means you have to act early in the offense itself. Deal with it right away, no delays. So if betimes is the when, this next part gets to the why. The guide uses this proverb to say the main trigger is something it calls foolishness, which it describes as being bound in the heart of a child. Okay, and the definition of foolishness here is absolutely crucial to understanding this whole thing. It's not what you might think. It's not about, spilling milk or making a silly mistake. In this framework, foolishness is defined specifically as rebellion against authority. That could be a big defiant act or something as small as a pout or a whine. And since the target is rebellion itself, not just honest mistakes, that leads us right into our third section. This is where the guide lays out a really, really clear and high standard for what obedience is supposed to look like. It all starts with this one simple rule. Delay is disobedience. Yeah, according to this source, there's no wiggle room. If you tell a child to do something and they wait, that hesitation, that is disobedience, and it has to be dealt with. So if delay is disobedience, what's the standard for obedience? Well, it's absolute, 100%. And the logic presented in the guide is pretty straightforward. If you accept anything less, you're basically teaching your child that, hey, sometimes it's okay not to obey. And it gets even more specific. There are 4 rules for what the source calls true obedience. First, it's got to be immediate. Do it the first time, no waiting. Second, it has to be without question. A kid can ask what to get clarity, but never why. Third, without complaint. Attitude is just as important as the action. And finally, it has to be complete. Doing half the job is still disobedience. So with a standard that strict, you're probably wondering, what's the actual method prescribed here? That brings us to our last section, which the guide calls a balanced approach to discipline. Drawing from another proverb, the guide lays out this 2-part method. Think of it like 2 sides of the same coin. On one side, you have the rod, that's described as the negative component, or physical correction. And on the other side, you have reproof, which is the positive component, or verbal instruction. The source is very clear that you can't have one without the other. Now, the guide gets very specific about what it means by the rod. It says it's not supposed to be a hard, stiff object that could cause injury, like a board or a big spoon. Instead, it's described as something flexible, an instrument that will sting, but is designed not to cause actual bone or muscle damage. But just as critical is the other half, reproof. And this isn't just a simple don't do that. It's defined as verbal teaching about instilling the right principles and attitudes. The source really hammers this home, warning that using the rod without this teaching part is useless and will just make a child angry and resentful. So let's just quickly recap the whole framework we've walked through. It's built on a model of love. It's triggered by what it defines as rebellion. It demands 100% obedience, and it uses a two-part method of physical correction paired with verbal instruction. And that's the breakdown of this system as presented in this guide. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. How does this framework, with its views on authority and obedience, stack up against some of the more common parenting philosophies you hear about today?